Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, uh, comic book fans the world over, welcome once again to Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a working, world famous comic book professional, questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I sit in my little lonely room and make stuff up. I write comic books. Rex Moss, what do you think about making a PG or PG-13 book out of an R-rated book like Levon's Trade? Torture and having the hero shoot a helpless opponent seems like it would get you an R for your book. Blunting the language a bit seems like an easy conversion to PG, but Levon's actions, converting the actions to PG seems harder. Then the tone. The book is a tough guy, hard-edged. Is this tone going to be able to be popular as a PG movie? It would seem to fit better with an R action thriller. I think what you're asking me is, would I entertain the idea of having a Baudelarized version of my Levon books? And no, I by no means. I would not change a word. Not that my writing's perfect, but it's what I wrote at that time in my life, in my career. This is what I wrote. This is the book that came out of me, and I don't want to see it changed in any way, altered in any way. And you're right. The book has a very mean tone. It's grown up, as you put it, R-rated stuff going on in the book, and I can't really change the way Levon operates. It would run counter to the tone, the mood, the atmosphere, and the core of the character that I was trying to put across. Levon is ruthless in his actions, as ruthless as a criminal in some cases, but sees himself, and hopefully the reader sees him as being on the side of the angels, and that everyone he kills had it coming, as it were. Um, as for changing the material for the upcoming Levon Trade movie, that's not happening either. Levon is going to appear in the movie very, very much the same, unaltered from the books. Sylvester Stallone is no stranger to writing 70s style, 80s style action with remorseless, ruthless anti-heroes. And David Ayer, the director, who also did a little bit of rewrite on the script, is also very, very well versed in writing mean, nasty, ruthless anti-hero characters. The movie Training Day, Sabotage, Fury, a number of other films he's worked on. End of Watch. These are movies that don't look away from the real life violence. Not that in the Levon Cade books I'm presenting anything like the real world, but I hope these books are grounded enough in reality that they do seem real. They do seem immediate, and altering them in any way would blunt my intent. So the Levon books have been referred to as 70s action film kind of thing, and often unforgiving, sometimes unfriendly, not always a happy ending for everybody. And the film series, from all the advanced word I'm getting, has much the same tone. So yeah, no changes here. Nope, 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 nope. Joshua Ignatowski, what would you say is the difference between story and plot, and what a plot needs added to it to become a full story? Well, plot, I mean, it's cliche to say this, but the plot is your framework of your story. It's the order in which things happen. It's what happens. What sets things in motion, what keeps them in motion, what is the resolution of everything at the end. And you can have plots that are as solid as a James Patterson novel, or you can go crazy and have Cormac McCarthy type plots, or even crazier Richard Brautigan type plots. If you've never read Richard Brautigan, uh, give him a shot. If you sort of want to wake yourself up to the possibilities of prose fiction. But yeah, your plot is your framework. It's where things are going. It's what you build upon. It's what you populate with characters and get things in motion. It's the hardest part of writing, which is why so many writers today avoid it, and they write what they call quote unquote character driven stories, which means the plot is secondary to you caring about their characters. I generally make you care about my characters very quickly by what they do, by setting the plot in motion and how the characters react to the challenges or the ordeals or the mysteries and conflicts of the plot. So you got to have plot, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna layer story on top of that. The plot is the roadmap. It's the framework. Now you got to figure out, all the rest. The scenery, the people, and what you want to do is you want to once you have your plot, just like when you're building a house. Going back to the house analogy because it's the easiest one. You put up the framework, and if you enjoy carpentry, you can appreciate the framework. It's beautiful in its own way. It's well done, and there's a lot of craftsmanship you can see. But when you move into the house, you don't want to see any of that. You want to hide that. So you put up drywall and brick and woodwork and blah 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 blah, and you paint and decorate and everything else. And essentially, once you move into the house, the framework is invisible. And that's the way you should write a story. You should write a story in which the reader, viewer, whatever, is not aware that they are watching a plot. And if you really succeeded, they're not even aware they're watching a story. They're simply experiencing what you're laying out before them, because that's where you're tapping into like the dream portions of the brain. Seriously, they've done studies on this, not particularly in reading, but in watching a movie. The parts of your brain used in dreaming are activated once you become engaged in a movie. You ever watch a really good movie and just time seems to pass by? You just weren't even aware. And then when you're watching a bad movie, you're kind of looking at the clock every once in a while, see how much time has passed. So the most successful stories engage you without, they completely suspend your disbelief, completely draw you into the reality created by the writer. And you can't see how he did it. I can't tell you how many times I've read authors like Cormac McCarthy particularly, and I've had to go back and reread the chapter because how did he make me feel this way? He didn't direct me to feel this way. He didn't tell me to feel this way. He didn't give me the internal thoughts of his characters or anything else, but somehow he created the emotion he wanted to create obliquely, using phrasing and pacing and wording that made me feel what he needed me to feel to understand the story and go back and look at it. It's just, it's an amazing talent to be able to hide your plot. And you always want to hide your plot. You don't want your reader sitting there. We've all done this. You're sitting there watching some streaming show going, I know what's going to happen next. And it does. That's what happens next, because you're not involved in the story. You're not engaged to the point where you're just willing to accept anything that comes next, because you're aware you're being manipulated. You can see the framework through the drywall. And you're anticipating the next scene, or even the next line of dialogue. We've all done that, where we know what the character's going to say next, and that's when you sort of switch to watching something else if you're smart, or if you're lazy and can't find the remote, you just watch it to the end, or fall asleep. Okay, Hey, Twin Spin. Joshua Ignatowski once again. What are some of the ways that you can go about giving characters internal conflict without making them wishy-washy? Well, once upon a time, back when I was a youngin', uh, most movie characters didn't have a backstory. They didn't have some internal tragedy or existential conflict within themselves. Or at least it wasn't brought out to the point where it interfered with the story. Uh, you might have some inferences from your lead characters that, bad stuff happened to them in the past. They're coming from a bad place, and maybe they're working things out in the desert or at sea or whatever. But that there wasn't enough of that to get in the way of the story. As I said, you got to engage the person in the story. When you concentrate too much on backstory and the person continually revisiting the internal conflicts of the past, this is when, like I said in answering the previous question, this is where you begin to see the framework. I'm being manipulated. This flashback is to manipulate me. It's a cheap, lazy way to get me engaged with this character, get me to relate to this character, instead of just moving the damn story along. Let's see what happens next. Now, sometimes your lead character, his internal conflicts, the tragedies of his past, the things that brought him to where he is today are the story. But that's fine, because it's, in a movie like Casablanca, where Rick is haunted by a past love who re-enters his life and creates a dilemma for him. Is he going to surrender to love or do the right thing, to be the bigger man and sacrifice his potential happiness for the rest of his life for a greater good? And that's the crux of Casablanca. But in this case, it's what the movie's about. It's not just an add-on to another story. I mean, how many times you watch like what should have been a simple shoot 'em up movie, a simple action film, but they lumber it with crap from the past. The best, worst example I can think of is the John Carter movie, the John Carter of Mars movie they made. And the greatest scene in the movie, which is John Carter and Tars Tarkas, versus a bunch of Tharks in the desert. They're outnumbered, hopelessly outnumbered, and they have this tremendous badass action scene right out of the Burroughs novels, where they're standing back to back, facing countless enemies and triumphing. Okay, it's pure Burroughs. But what the movie does, it ruins the scene. It cuts the legs right out from under the scene by introducing this tragic backstory for John Carter about how he lost his plantation and his family was killed and everything else during the Civil War. And they decide to introduce this tragic backstory in the middle of what would have been the movie's greatest scene. The scene that you paid money for a ticket to see. This is what this movie promised you. It's delivering, but now we gotta, take the bitter with the sweet, and you've got to intercut to this, at this point, entirely irrelevant, unwelcome, uninvited, and not part of the original Burroughs story, this element of tragedy cut into what could have been an absolutely classic action scene. That, though I won't go into it, the many, many, many mistakes that they made making this movie. But that was the most horrific for me as a fan of Burroughs, as a fan of cinema, to do that to yourself. Why would you do that to yourself? But we see this over and over and over again, where they want to just sort of wallow in the tragedy. Now, we've all had tragedy in our lives, most of us. We've lost loved ones. Even if it's like grandparents or whatever, it's tragedy. And often as a little kid, you lose a pet, something like that. It's a traumatic event. It's an event you're not going to forget. It's like an awakening to mortality. It's an awakening to a whole bunch of emotions that you've never experienced before. But you go on. You go on. You survive. You laugh. You get another dog. Whatever. Life goes on. And when you're gone, life's going to keep on going on. Anyway, people will miss you. They'll mourn you, hopefully, and grieve over you. But life will go on. And you want that. You want that to go on. You don't want people to be devastated by loss of any kind. And we see, if you've ever met, and I've met many veterans, combat veterans, who suffered PTSD, but you wouldn't know it from talking to them. They're not sitting in a room under a ceiling fan, brooding in the shadows. No, they're out, delivering the mail, or, whatever, mowing their lawn, raising the kids, paying the bills. So, life just isn't like that. I saw an interview years ago with Zero Mostel, and they talked to him about acting in general and acting in theater. And they brought up Death of a Salesman. And he said that, he didn't like the way Arthur Miller, in Death of a Salesman, he didn't like the way most often Willie Loman, the lead character, was played, because he was played like a tragic character. He didn't seem three-dimensional. He was sad, 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 sad all the time. And Zero Mostel said, I throw a few laughs into the play just to make the guy seem human. And that's what you need to do. You can't just rely on the past. I mean, look at something like Walking Dead. Yeah, it's a post-apocalyptic zombie thriller, which after a couple of seasons wasn't so thrilling anymore. They left the thriller part behind. And for God knows how many seasons, just had the characters wallow in sadness and internal conflict. I cut out after an entire season of the lead characters having the same conversation over and over and over again, of reacting to the things they had to do to survive to this point. In some cases, horrible things, leaving people behind, actually killing people in order to survive, and them, atoning. An entire season of the different characters meeting together to atone in a world that was ending, in a world of incredible violence swirling around them all the time. And all they could do is look inside and look to the past. And it was unwatchable. It was unwatchable. It was like watching paint dry. It wasn't even as interesting in watching paint dry, because it just seemed there was ever going to be an end to it. They were just going to wallow. There was no resolution. We didn't learn anything new about the characters. They certainly weren't doing anything. They were just sort of walking around, blah, 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 talking. And, it killed the series for me, and apparently millions of others who simply stopped watching it. I would rather get back to the kind of hero who doesn't have internal conflicts, who isn't tortured by the past, who isn't all torn up. Especially if you're not going to write them in an interesting way. If you're just going to do that to gain sympathy for the character, I just have no interest in that. I just want to see what happens next. I don't want to see a movie about a great character. I want to see a movie about a really good story with a great character in it, or a really good story in which we're introduced to a character who becomes great over the course of the story. And I'm talking, just mainstream entertainment. I'm not talking about, whatever, literature or, pretenses to art, because I have no pretenses to art. I appreciate art, but I have no pretenses toward it. But that said, with the proper writers, and a complex character with a traumatic past and moral conflicts, internal demons, can be fascinating. Tony Soprano is an amazing character. What's amazing about it is, over the many seasons of Sopranos, they built this character so that by the end of the series, you understood him a lot better. You would often find out that, boy, I thought I knew this about this character, but I didn't. Or I didn't anticipate the character was going to do this, because I didn't know them well enough. And usually in entertainment, that's a contrivance where they'll just change for the sake of shock. But with Tony Soprano, no, he was created whole in the minds of the creators and revealed to the viewer a little bit at a time over the course of the series. And even when there seemed to be conflicts, no, those conflicts were built into the character. There were contradictions and everything else built into his personality. And we learn over the course of the series what a venal monster this character is. Our expectations that he's amiable and likable and everything else are, continuously and routinely torn apart, reversed. We have to keep changing our mind about this character. And that's not because the writers changed anything or contrived anything. That's the way they wrote it. They wrote this guy with so many different internal contradictions and complications and everything else that he doesn't become whole in our minds until, toward the end of the series. And that is not lazy writing. That's amazing, amazing stuff, and a rarity these days, where I'm not going to always blame writers, although there's a bunch of lazy ones out there. I'm going to blame producers and studios and networks and people like that who on Sopranos continuously question what the creators were doing, but the creators ignored them, and because they knew the audience was smart enough to get what they're. I mean, obviously, they were right. The audience for Sopranos was enormous. Continues to this day to have a loyal viewership of people who watch and rewatch and rewatch the series over and over and over again as an American classic, which it is. And so I don't always blame the writer, although there's a lot of lazy writers out there. Triple spin, Joshua. You're just hitting it out of the park today. Have you ever come across comic books based on video games such as Mario Brothers, comics by Valiant, or the Sonic comics by Archie? If so, what are your thoughts on them? Also, if you had to choose a video game IP to write comics for, which one would it be and why? I was aware of the Sonic books. I know Archie's had a lot of success. I mean, it's been decades doing Sonic. And I would imagine it's their best-selling title because the character's enormously popular. I did not know about Mario Brothers from Valiant, although I assume, given the proper merchandising, proper marketing, Mario would be very successful for them as well. I know I've seen Sonic on the newsstand. I've never seen a Mario comic. I don't go to the comic shops a lot. I don't even know if the comic shops order these books because comic shops are not for the juvenile audience that these books are intended for. What do I think of it? I think, hey, why not? When I was a kid, they had TV and movie tie-in comics. Of course, you're going to have video game tie-in comics. I mean, now they're making movies based on the video games. Hell, they're making movies based on board games. So, it's because they're completely out of ideas. I mean, next they're going to be making movies based on detergents. Tide, the movie. Because they just don't know what to do. It's like, well, people know what Tide is. They wash clothes. If I was to pick a game franchise, probably be one I played, and I don't play a lot of video games. Many, many years ago, I played Call of Duty, the World War II. I don't know where they're fighting in Call of Duty now. And, it would be an excuse just to write a World War II story. I know when I played Call of Duty, and this is probably 15, 16 years ago, I spent a lot of time on the Russian front. I was fascinated by that aspect of the game, and I think I killed everybody 100 times over in that game and died a million times. So that's probably where I'd go. But a question about comics based on video games would not be complete without naming the greatest comic book ever based, not on a video game, but on a video game system. And that's Atari Force from DC. I don't know who owns the rights to this. I wish they'd reprint it. Atari Force was based on, the Atari game system in some tangential way, although the games are never actually represented in the comic. None of the game. I mean, what would you do with Space Invaders, or Pong, in a comic book? But Jerry Conway and Juan Garcia Lopez created this just amazing space opera story, Star Wars-esque space opera story that was later on taken over by Mike Barron and Eduardo Barreto, who continued it on in the excellent form in which it had started, populated with lots of fun characters, tremendous action, just a straight up space opera. Not only is this the best video game comic ever done, it's the best Star Wars knockoff comic ever done, because all the characters are memorable and indelible. If you can find these, and I've probably just raised the price on them by talking about them, give them a look. The art is just freaking gorgeous, and the writing is sharp and funny and fast paced, and I really dug it. And maybe they've already collected them. This really deserves like a prestige collection. I assume Atari owns the rights to the stuff, not DC, but just absolutely beautiful stuff. Okay, we have at WTK60609, as he's known around the house. Chuck, I happened across 3 trades of Van Helsing stories from Zenescope written by you. I honestly don't know much about this company other than some eye-catching covers, but they seem like a unique company that occupies its own niche in comics. What was it like working for them? It was cool. Van Helsing and Robin Hood and a bunch of other characters like that. I had a good time working for them. It's a tightly held, privately owned company in Pennsylvania, not too far from where I lived back then. And the niche they have is an attractive, strong female lead, generally involved in horror situations, and they have this whole shared horror fairy tale fantasy universe that these guys have created. And they would come to me every once in a while, and you have an idea for this, you have an idea for that. A couple of times they brought me ideas, and I thought, well, I kind of made my bones in this business writing, strong female characters. This is long before the Mary Sue and Girl Boss movement. I write, real 3-dimensional female characters with flaws, and they were like humans, almost. And I present them with a plot, and they would say, "Cool, let's do that," and then they would leave me alone. So it was a lot of fun to work on. It was a lot of fun to work for those guys. They put up with me and let me do crazy things with their characters that I enjoyed. And the art was always attractive. Professional product. I stopped working for them when I got busy with other stuff. But every once in a while they'll email and say, anytime you want to come back and do some more, we can do it. And that might happen because it was cool stuff. Werewolves, vampires, monsters, zombies, and chicks with guns and bows. Yeah, cool. I'm there. Just sort of touches on the Roger Corman portion of my creative ability. So anyway, so what do we got next here? Okay, hold on. I did that wrong. Subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. If you have subscribed, thank you. Helps build the channel. Getting pretty close to 10,000. Struggling, climbing, clawing my way up to 10,000. You would think it would work better than that. You think once I got past a certain point, the numbers would grow geometrically. But that's not how YouTube works. YouTube's not in the real world. They got algorithms. And by algorithms, I mean restrictions and strange rules and complications that make life harder for everybody. So, all right, now let's get this back in order. Okay, at Trembling Colors, I can understand not liking the Endor stuff from Return of the Jedi, but you didn't like the Luke, Vader, and Palpatine stuff either. Yeah, I was a huge, I will confess, I was a huge Star Wars fan. Close to obsession. I really dug Star Wars. I really liked Star Wars, and I wanted more and more good Star Wars, and especially after Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back was such a love letter to science fiction fans, space opera fans. It was so it was a perfect sequel to the first film. The first film sort of gathers up all of these, pop culture tropes and puts them all in one movie with, what at the time were incredible special effects, lots of imagination and compelling characters. And then Empire Strikes Back delivers on all that and explores it more and it builds the characters more and really makes us fall in love with them and everything else. And then we get to Return of the Jedi, and it's like, what the hell happened? You took all the stuff from Empire, you took everything you'd built, and just sort of like, phoned it in. And we all know the many problems, but I'll review them anyway because it gives me a chance to carp about them. In the original film, as conceived by George Lucas and Gary Kurtz, Return of the Jedi was supposed to go to the Wookiee world. And much of the action was to take place there. And it was the Wookiee world that was under threat from the Empire. It was the Wookiee world about which the new Death Star was orbiting. And the Wookiees being, basically a Neolithic culture. Not a whole lot they could do against the Empire. And they were suffering depredations and everything else. And it brings me to another problem I have with the Star Wars movies and with the Star Wars franchise in general going forward from this point. In Star Wars, George Lucas made sure that you understood that the Empire, not only made sure, but he demonstrated why the Empire were the bad guys, because they were doing bad things. They destroyed an entire planet just to make a point to Princess Leia. And they were obviously oppressors. Obviously, everyone living under this intergalactic police state. In Empire Strikes Back, we see it again. We see the ruthlessness of the Empire. They're not nice guys, even to each other. Okay, these are not the people you want making the rules, and it's all made very clear. We get to Return of the Jedi and beyond, and they don't seem to feel a need to show you why the Empire is bad anymore. It's just enough that our heroes are good and our heroes are virtuous and driven by a cause and everything else. But we kind of need to see the reason for the cause. What are they reacting to? What are they rebelling against? And from this point on, we really don't see that. I imagine if this was a Wookiee world thing, we would see the Wookiees being oppressed because Wookiees are not, they're not going to lay down and take this. They're not just going to let stormtroopers walk all over the place and tell them what to do. They're going to, there's going to be a little pushback, and there would have been scenes of that. We would have seen scenes of characters that through Chewbacca, we've already come to have an affection for. We see them being used and abused by stormtroopers, giving us even more motivation as to why the Empire is wrong. And why the dark side is wrong, but none of that. We don't see any of that. We don't see the Ewoks being oppressed or crushed or whatever. And speaking of Ewoks, I mean, come on, George Lucas, did you really need that much more money? Now the excuse is that money was always a problem with these movies. Lucas was the only time Lucas got involved in Empire Strikes Back is when he felt they were spending too much money, when the shoot was taking too long. And I think all of those arguments are bogus because Star Wars made an ungodly amount of money. And Empire Strikes Back's budget wasn't that, it was double. I think it was probably doubled from Star Wars budget, but Star Wars budget was not that high. Star Wars was made for $9 million in 1970s dollars, which even in 1970s wasn't really that much to make a big A picture like that. And to double it, well, why not double it? Star Wars, earned money from its negative costs in magnitudes. It's a money machine. On top of that, the merchandising. And who owned the merchandising? Not 20th Century Fox, Lucas. Lucas had all the licensing power. He made all the money from the licensing. Money was never a problem for him. was never a problem for the films to go forward. And the Ewoks are created to create a character, a new character that the kids could, the little kids could have as a toy, as a teddy bear. As if a Wookiee isn't a great teddy bear. And I have so many problems with the Ewoks. First of all, they're not convincing. They're obviously little people in fuzzy suits. They didn't even bother to make full masks for a lot of the extras, so their faces don't move. They've got dead eyes. They're unconvincing. They're not a challenge to the Empire. The whole thing is ridiculous. You already know this. I don't need to argue this anymore. The change from one to the other was disastrous. And apparently a lot of this grew out of conflict between Gary Kurtz and George Lucas. Kurtz seemed to be the sane one here. He seemed to be the one thinking, this is going to be 6 movies. Lucas apparently just wanted out. Just wanted to make the 3rd movie and go on. Insiders who know, and there's receipts to show this, show that Lucas came up with the idea that Leia and Luke were sisters, which comes out of nowhere. If you watch the movies, it's like, what? they're brother and they weren't acting like brother and sister. They were acting like love interests, potential love interests. In the original version, Leia is no relation to Luke, and why would she be? I mean, how do you hide somebody by making them a princess? I mean, Luke being a farmer, humble farmer, on a desert planet, makes who's ever going to go looking there? So in the next movie after what was Revenge of the Jedi was going to be Luke looking for his sister. He finds out he has a sister and goes looking for her. It's a quest to find the sister, and and that all makes a whole lot of sense. But Kurtz and Lucas had a falling out over Empire Strikes Back, and Lucas basically fires Kurtz because of cost overruns on Empire Strikes Back. I don't believe that for a second. It makes absolutely no sense. First of all, they're partners. How do you fire your partner? How do you fire the guy that helped you bring all this about? Secondly, even if there were cost overruns, when the money comes pouring in from Empire Strikes Back, when Empire Strikes Back is this year's biggest movie, the summer's biggest hit, the box office is incredible, why wouldn't you go back to the guy you fired for cost overruns and say, I made a mistake. You were right. The cost overruns are irrelevant now. We've more than covered them. Come back into the fold. But he did not want Kurtz there. He did not want anyone telling him no. He wanted all yes men and yes women on his staff, and he didn't want somebody there saying that's a terrible idea. He did not want the man standing in the chariot behind him going sic transit gloria. It's that's hubris. I mean, you people out there, the people I'm talking to right now who read my work, you're my Gary Kurtzes. If I go off the reservation, you folks are going to call me on it. You're going to let me know, and I'm going to listen to you. I'm not going to say you're wrong. But you're the consumer. And Gary Kurtz is putting himself in the place of the consumer. He was putting himself in the place of all of us Star Wars fans, trying to make sure that we were never disappointed again. And Kurtz was far more involved with Empire Strikes Back than Lucas was. I think Lucas visited the set one time. Maybe answered a couple of phone calls, but he was off doing other stuff. Kurtz was there on hand, and we see the result. Star Wars with Kurtz, Star Wars without Kurtz. And I don't know, just everything established in Empire Strikes Back just sort of falls apart. Han Solo we love him in Star Wars. He becomes such a badass in the second one, and a terrific romantic lead. And he's funny, and he's everything we wanted Han Solo to be. And then in Return of the Jedi, he's sort of a doofus. He's sort of standing around, and you could tell Harrison Ford wasn't engaged at all. He's phoning this thing in. He's just playing a goofball, and pretty much an unnecessary character. He's not even needed in the plot. He's given nothing to do virtually. The easy mission of taking the ground thing made easier by, the lunacy of the Ewok sequences. Oh, well, I won't go back there. And then my understanding is the Emperor was not supposed to die at the end of this movie. The Emperor would continue through 3 more films, 6 films, and Kurtz was pushing for that. Another reason Lucas opened a trapdoor under him. So yeah, these sequences are good, but you know, a lot of my problem with Star Wars is there's too much Jedi and too little of everything else. In the first film, we're sort of like, okay, this is Jedi stuff, and that's okay. But there's also the Han Solo space smuggler, space pirate, you know, hody ho, shoot 'em up adventure guy. And I always thought that the movies would be a balance of the two going forward. But going forward, of course, the Jedi took over every possible plot line. Every possible storyline became Jedi centric. And let's face it, the Jedis are boring. Just boring, autocratic, smug. I don't like the Jedis. You know, every once in a while there's an attempt to breathe some life into them. You know, the first prequel, there's a little bit of humor, a little bit of byplay, but all that's gone by the second. And then, you know, for me, every successful Star Wars property after that has no Jedi. You know, Rogue One, no Jedi. It's the best of the later Star Wars movies, which isn't saying much. The bar is so low, but it's actually a decent Star Wars movie. Andor, I've tried watching it. I lost interest, but it wasn't. It was at least, you know, somewhat engaging. No Jedi. And Mandalorian, very little Jedi stuff, and consequently hugely successful because I think the audience wanted more, you know, hody ho, rocket ship adventure stuff, and less of the nonsense of the Jedi and their their pathetic religion. All right, you were David Zwally asks. You were talking about doing a Dirty Harry Batman crossover. Do you think Dirty Harry would be a better counter to Frank Castle, or would Paul Kersey be a more interesting crossover? Yeah, I proposed back in the 90s, for those who never watched one of these videos or have forgotten, a Dirty Harry Batman crossover comic, like a one-shot event. And Warner's loved it because they own both properties. DC was all for it. So it was going to be a slam dunk with the legal department, which is what they always appreciated. And it didn't get shot down until it got taken to Clint Eastwood for final approval. Clint Eastwood doesn't own Dirty Harry, but he may as well. You know, it's a cult of personality thing. You can't do it without Clint say so, which is cool. I respect that. And Clint did not want to be represented in comic book form. He didn't want the character done, you know, denigrated or whatever. Although I'd say Deadpool denigrated the character as much as any movie or anything could possibly have denigrated it. But he said no, and so it went nowhere. Dirty Harry meets Punisher. I don't know how interesting that would be. It might be if they were after the same guy, and then it would be a race to see who gets him first. But in a situation like that, I think Harry would just go, let's let that guy get him. He's he doesn't have a badge. He doesn't have any rules. As long as the guy we're after ends up dead, I don't care who did it. You know, he got hit by a train, I'd be all for that. As far as Dirty Harry meets Paul Kersey is the lead character from Death Wish movies. I don't think that would be interesting either for the same reasons. You know, Harry would just walk away and let this guy do his thing. Plus, Paul Kersey, not a larger than life character the way that Harry Callahan and Punisher and Batman are. That's what really made the Batman Dirty Harry idea click. Is, you know, they're both larger than life characters, and it would have been fascinating to write and fun to write, and I believe interesting for the readers to see these two meet up. Twin spin. Okay, David Zwally. Also, more of a writing question. When writing a period piece, do you think it's important to get the dialogue accurate to the period? And where would be a good place to research Revolutionary New England dialogue? Yeah, you got to get the dialogue right. At least the feel. at least the tone of it. And now you're going to go, well, how can you be period accurate? Yada, yada, yada. Actually, there's a lot of room. There's a lot of wiggle room in the further you go back, the more wiggle room there is in getting dialogue that isn't anachronistic or makes sense for the period. And I'm going to explain why. But specifically, if you're writing colonial America, there's plenty of stuff written in the time of colonial America. And I would look, there's obviously there's newspapers, printing was a thing. So the written word is everywhere. But you got to watch out because the written word is written by writers, and they're not writing the way people talked. What you want to look for is you want to look for memoirs and diaries and things like that. It's like, for me, a guideline for writing people in the 19th century is Ulysses S. Grant's autobiography, which he wrote himself. And it's surprising how fresh and contemporary a lot of his phrasing is. There's nothing antiquated or arcane or seemingly dated about it. It seems like he wrote it yesterday. And that's surprising. And that's where you begin to open your eyes that there's wiggle room here. So what you want to do is you want to find, memoirs and diaries. This will give you phrasing and vocabulary and things like that, an idea of how these people may have talked to each other. Now, the saving grace is we'll never know how they talk to each other. So whatever you write could be accurate as long as you keep anachronisms out of it. I mean, obviously, Revolutionary America, you're not going to have them, talking about social media or telephones or, whatever we talk about today. And so there's a guideline. Now where do we get to the wiggle room? The English language, as a universally understood language, isn't that old. And it certainly was never codified until we get to Shakespeare and another guy I'm going to talk about in a minute. Shakespeare has to write dialogue, some of it often period dialogue, not from his period, but from writing about ancient Rome, Venice. His audience has never been ancient Rome. His audience has never been to Venice. But he also had to write in a way. He had to write a language that his audience would understand, appreciate, and be entertained by. Okay, so because his actors are speaking dialogue, the dialogue is informing. Because there wasn't huge sets and and things like that in a Shakespeare play. He can only inform the audience through dialogue, and the characters are often telling the audience what's going on, and he has to reach them in a language they all understand. His audience is largely illiterate, and most of England, even the nobility, are largely illiterate. They cannot read. They have not been exposed to any kind of sort of shared language. There's not really anything like popular literature going on. There's no pop culture. There's no lowbrow reading whatsoever. You have to be wealthy to afford books. And mostly the only language they see are postings or bills put up on walls that those who can read, and those who can read to others who can't read. For the rest of it, you've got the town crier, who's basically going through town telling people the news, telling people what's going on, because they can't read. Right? How do you write for an audience like that? Well, Shakespeare, this is why we remember Shakespeare. He writes in a way that's evocative, funny, ironic, often dramatic. But he also, because there's so many shortcomings in the English language, there's so many things there simply are no words for that are understood by everybody. Okay, there might be a word for something up in up in Wales, not understood by somebody in London, and not understood by somebody in the Cotswolds. They all have different phrases for each other because these people are not intercommunicating with a common language. We watch television today and we're watching common English language. We understand what the people on TV are saying because over time, television, radio, newsprint have brought our language together, brought us more together to have more of a shared national patois. Well, in Elizabethan England, this did not exist. And so Shakespeare has to create language that his audience will understand and often has to make words up. He made up 1,500 words because there weren't any words in English to say what he needed to say. But he made them up in such a way that you understood the meaning of them in context. Was this guy a genius or what? Yes, he was a genius. So he creates these words in context, and you can go on the internet, you can Google it and look. A lot of these words we still use today. I mean, he just made up words that all of us use, and forget phraseology. Phrases and cliches and things that Shakespeare came up with today that are just part of our speech. We say stuff we don't even know. We know what it means, but we don't know why we're saying it. And we don't know the real meaning of it. We know the adapted meaning of I wish I could think of one off the top of my head, but my brain's just not operating on that level today. I'm no Shakespeare. But you see what I mean? There's wiggle room here with period dialogue because there was no common language amongst anyone in the world until basically broadcast entertainment comes along. Talking films, radio, TV. There's no shared language. And so it's wide open for how you want your characters to talk. You can create a whole dialect for your characters if you want, a whole phraseology that you know, just create new things. It's wide open and a challenge, and it's the fun part of writing period stuff is that you can have your characters talk any way they want, and they can all have a shared patois, or you can have characters come along who just have their own way of talking. Coen Brothers movies are full of that kind of stuff, where characters just have their own way of talking. When I wrote Hunter Ninja Bear, a lot of the characters were mountain men, and they were from different regions of the country. And some of them I purposely wrote so that you couldn't understand what they were saying, even in context. Everything they said seemed non sequitur because this was their way of communicating, and they didn't really give a damn if anybody understood what they were saying. They just wanted to say it. So these, you know, that's where you go. That's the wiggle room. That's the space you're given. The other guy who helped bring the language together is William Tyndale, who suffered for his efforts. He translated the Bible into English, which at the time was against the law. So the King James Bible is Tyndale, and it's so beautifully written. It's so beautifully written. And again, like Shakespeare, he has to make words up. He has to make up phraseology. He has to think of, you know, how do I get these ideas across? It's very sophisticated, very complicated ideas across, you know, which are very well put across in Aramaic, very well put across in Greek. How's he going to put them across in English in a way that is engaging and informative and, you know, translates the word of God properly? And, you know, it's incalculable how much this guy added to our shared language. Paul Redford, you mentioned that the book series backstory inspired your writings. What are some of your favorite backstory chapters and why? Yeah, Backstory is a series of books that interview screenwriters, and they're screenwriters from all the way from the silent era until, you know, quite recently into the 90s. And if you're a writer or want to be a writer or just interested in writing, these are great books. Don't ever read a how-to book on writing. Read Backstory. It brings you into the inner workings, the day-to-day problems and challenges that a writer faces, their process, and then every writer has a different process, and you're exposed to all these different terrific, successful screenwriters and the stories they have to tell about all the stuff they did. And it's a tremendous introduction. to the writing form. My favorite story is Philip Jordan, who wrote everything from biblical epics to spaghetti westerns, film noir. This guy did everything, and he was very much a script doctor. He's a guy that productions brought in when they were in trouble. And my favorite story is he was brought into the movie Johnny Guitar. Johnny Guitar is a really, really odd western, very strange movie. Joan Crawford and Sterling Hayden. And they were having problems with Joan Crawford. She was very, very unhappy with the production of this film. She didn't like what was going on. Her and Mercedes McCambridge were constantly fighting on set, and things weren't going well. So the studio called out for Philip Jordan, and they flew him to Arizona or New Mexico or wherever they were filming the movie on location. And he realized this movie ain't going anywhere until Joan Crawford's happy. And so he sat down with Joan Crawford and listened to her complaints. And he said, I think I see the problem here. He said, you want to be the man in this movie. You want to be the male lead. And she said, I think that's it. I think that's what it is. I'm not happy being in a movie in which I'm the star. I'm really the second lead after Sterling Hayden. And I'm acting like a shrinking violet, which, Joan Crawford wasn't good at playing shrinking violets. And so Jordan said, I'll start writing tonight. And he wrote enough material overnight that they could go back into production. And then just stayed with the production, rewriting the movie as they went along. So that's cool stuff. J.P. Roca, I just read DC's Kingdom Come for the first time. From what you've said in previous videos, the story has a similar plot as Nightfall and the Azrael arc. Is this something Denny O'Neil was aware of? And if so, did he have any issues with it? I do not know. And I never read it. I just had no interest in it. And I didn't know that it was close to the Nightfall storyline. And I imagine if Denny read it, I'll bet you Denny never read it either. If he did, he skimmed it. He didn't have a lot of interest in these, mega events. He would not have approved. He would have seen it. I kind of think that he didn't read it because I think everybody in the Bat Office would have heard about it. Because everybody was talking about this series because it was supposed to be, it was supposed to be huge blockbuster Boffo kind of thing, which I don't think it ever became. And it was supposed to alter the course of DC continuity, and that, well, the effects of that really weren't felt until later. My only connection to Kingdom Come was I got in trouble over Kingdom Come because it. And now that I think about it, Denny wasn't even at DC when Kingdom Come came out. Bob Schreck was group editor. And I got in trouble. I went to this little comic shop down in Delaware. And me and I think Flint Henry and Bo Smith were there with me. And we did an appearance. And it was such a tiny comic shop that we had to do the appearance outside. Like they put up an awning, like a tent. And we were sitting outside. Talking to people and signing comics and everything else. And some guy asked me about Kingdom Come, and he said something about a multiverse. He heard something that was going to involve multiverses. And I was like, I don't know. And I didn't know. I said, I guess that's possible. Well, it gets back to DC because this was the dawn of the internet. Apparently this guy ran to his little keyboard and said that I confirmed his opinion that this is going to be about multiverses, which apparently was the big surprise of Kingdom Come, that they were going to reveal the existence of the multiverses, which I thought we already knew about Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, Earth 6.5. Anyway, next time I go up to DC, I'm called on the carpet. I wasn't even on the internet at this point. I didn't know what the hell was going on there. It was a different world. And Bob Schreck, and he has some, higher up in the company there with him. And they basically scold me about that I ruined the Kingdom Come, that I revealed the big reveal and it was no longer a surprise and everything else and all that stuff. And I'm like, this is BS. I didn't know one way or the other. I didn't know I had no interest and did not know what was going on in Kingdom Come. Why would I reveal something I didn't know? I said, this fan guessed, and I said, maybe you might be right. You know, I didn't know if he was right or not. And I just remember Bob Schreck was just big smile on his face, just real happy to try to get me in trouble at DC. And big smile on his face. He says, well, yeah, well, just stay away from the internet. I'm like, yeah, okay. Great advice for all of us. Just stay away from the internet. Mattel Jones, what if one of these AI guys fed everything as Steve Ditko or Russ Heath, for example, ever drew, and maybe any interview materials for personality context, and with the result being you could feed the AI a script, would produce artwork that was indistinguishable from the real thing. The capper being that some large percentage of any resulting royalties would be directed to the artist's estate. The same thing might be possible with a writer. Say they took everything you've ever written for comics, novels, etc., or talked about online, or said in an interview, and then gave it prompts for creating a story in the Chuck Dixon style. Again, with a large percentage of any dollars going to your estate. We're talking in the distant future, of course. Creepy or interesting? Creepy. Just completely creepy. If you fed all of Ditko into the machine, what would you get? Would you get, because let's face it, as much as I admire Ditko, love Ditko, is the reason I write comics, his style devolved. His talent eroded away over time. And if you put it all in, you're just sort of going to get, mediocre, meh. Steve Ditko. Same to a lesser degree with Russ Heath. I mean, as Russ got older, as he got into his 80s, his work was less detailed. Always well drawn. Always anatomy, composition, all the rest of it, but less detailed. And if you create an amalgam of older Russ and newer Russ, you're just going to get mediocre Russ. Which nobody wants to see. And you could say, well, we'll just put in the best of their stuff. Well, how does AI know what the best is and what the best isn't? And you might get something that looks like their stuff until you read it. And that's the case with a lot of comics that, like, we've all done this. You go to a comic shop and you're leafing through a comic. You go, oh, this artwork's terrific. This is fantastic. What a pretty book. Yeah, I'm going to buy this. And you take it home and read it, and it's not engaging. The story's not good. It turns out the artwork's well done, but the artist isn't a particularly good storyteller, and it's not engaging, and you've just wasted the money and time you've invested in this thing. And I think that's the case with a lot of AI stuff. I wouldn't want to go anywhere near any AI, and I certainly wouldn't want AI Chuck Dixon stories. Because I like to think, whether it's true or not, that I have a unique voice that can't be replicated and manipulated. And as we see, so much of AI is not just raw, naked data. It's influenced. It has algorithms. It has guidelines. The AI is told what to do. We've all seen the politically correct AI, in which we get a black George Washington or an Asian female Napoleon, because AI has been told this is diversity is important. Apparently, Elon Musk is talking about, he's not involved with it, but he's promoting an AI thing that is blind, that has no prejudices, has nothing built into it. It's all just raw, naked data, producing new images. But even that, I mean, I've seen AI comics, and again, they look pretty. When you go to read them, they're dead. They're dead. There's just something about that human hand, even working digitally, that we need to see. We need to see the hand at work in the artwork. We need to know that a human created this, and why anybody would read anything knowing that it was created by a program, I don't understand. Maybe other programs could read those programs. I don't get it. It's not the future of creative stuff, and nothing's changed. You still got to reach an audience. You still got to engage. and the rest of it. And I think there's a limitation as to what AI can do. And we're already seeing with the cookie cutter assembly line kind of entertainment being presented out of Hollywood these days, what AI would look like. It would just look lifeless and dead on arrival. Hey, are you reading My Sister Suprema? You can read it online at Archaven Comics. The first volume, comic book album, is out. You can find that at Archaven or on Amazon. And me and Anthony Gonzalez have just put together volumes 2 and 3. Should be available soon in this ongoing saga of Randy and his superpowered big sister. That's it for me this week. I want to thank you all for listening, watching, liking, subscribing, all the rest. And I will see everybody down the road.